Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to a Chopra Center program, the Perfect Health Lifestyle Program. My name is Leo Carver. I'm a certified Ayurvedic consultant and instructor with the Chopra Center, as well as a blogger for Chopra Center Lifestyle and a writer for several other sites related to meditation and yoga. And I will be your instructor for this program. Uh, Most of what we cover in this program will be based on Ayurvedic principles, which we'll get into a little further explanation of Ayurveda here in a second. But first, I'd like to go over the course a little bit and explain what we are going to be exploring. So here's the basic breakdown of the course here. As you can see, this is a 5-lesson program. And each lesson has several subtopics within them. So we'll be spending a little time on each one of these and try to bring together all these subjects to give you a comprehensive overview of Ayurveda and how you can bring it into your life. So in lesson 1, we're going to start with the basic principles of Ayurveda and get into your dosha constitution, as well as teach you how to build up a basic meditation practice, which is essential for this to really cement itself within your lifestyle. Um, then there's lesson 2, where we're going to cover more so the actual process of eating. Ayurveda is very diet based and nutrition based, so we'll be talking about a little bit of that as we get into lesson 2, as far as how you're supposed to eat, and how your digestion actually works from an Ayurvedic standpoint. And then in lesson 3, we'll be talking about detoxification, how to sync yourself with the different processes going on in the world at large and within and without, in your experience. Um, we call this lesson perpetual renewal, because basically, as you'll see when we get there, this covers the Ayurvedic concept of syncing yourself with the universe at large and using that to bring healing into your life. So that's a very good lesson there. Um, and lesson 4, also important, is emotional freedom. So we're going to be talking a lot about how to communicate better with your co-workers, your family, your loved ones, and also how to clear out some of the emotional junk that we tend to carry around usually, and just in general how to be more in tune with ourselves. And then in lesson 5, we're going to conclude the program by going into some of the different ways that you can tap into your inner pharmacy. And in this, we'll be covering topics like primordial sound, some of the ways that you process your environment, as far as your senses, and different ways that you can manipulate these things to all come together and help you create a more balanced lifestyle. Before we begin, I always like to have students set their intentions for the course. This is a good practice in terms of when you complete it and you look back on the information you've retained and the practices that hopefully you've picked up. But it is also good to do it from the outset, from the beginning, just so that you know where you are with this and what your purpose is in taking this. Maybe you just wanted to take this course for the continuing education credits, or maybe you were just looking into mind body medicine and more holistic methods of maintaining your health, whatever it might be. So right now, um, what I would like everyone to do is to get quiet and get settled, and take a few deep breaths. You can close your eyes. It's not necessary. This is not a meditation. We'll get into that later. But it is a type of centering your awareness. Okay, so it does help to close your eyes at times. Um, but take a 2 or 3 deep breaths and place your attention on your heart. If it helps, you can even place one of your hands over your heart in the center where the heart chakra is, not necessarily the organ, but the center of your mass there, and just put your concentration there in your heart and ask these simple questions. Why are you here? Wherever here may be for you. But here, in terms of your consciousness, why are you taking this course? Why are you listening? Why do you care? Why are you here? And don't try to answer these questions with your mind, as you'll see a lot of times in meditation or when we are centering ourselves, our minds tries to give these immediate answers. But many times those answers are not the answers. They're just a reply. So with this, as with all questions, when we go into that inner space, you need to allow the answers to just bubble up, just come to you naturally, without effort. Why are you here? And then ask yourself, ask your heart, what do you hope to gain from this course? Take a couple more deep breaths, and we will begin. So, you may be asking yourself, what exactly is this Ayurveda stuff? I was signing up for a class on perfect health and thought I might learn a few little techniques here, but what in the world is Ayurveda? It wouldn't be the first time that I've seen that response in people. And basically, to give you a little background, Ayurveda is a 5,000-year-old system that comes from ancient India, and it deals with all aspects of life and all aspects of health, primarily. The actual breakdown of the word in its original Sanskrit meanings is Ayus, which means life, and Veda, which you may be familiar with, that means science or knowledge or wisdom. And so basically, Ayurveda is the science of life, as seen by these yogis and these sages from ancient India, where they had this understanding of how our consciousness is the basis for everything that we experience in life. What we call life, our bodies, our environment, everything. And so that there is wisdom there, and there's health and awareness there that when we tap into it properly, allows everything else in our life to blossom, and that is a basis for how Ayurveda works. At the Chopra Center, Ayurveda is central to most of what is being taught. Although the center, as well as one of the founders, Dr. Deepak Chopra, who you may be familiar with, they cover a vast array of topics that are related to consciousness and to health. Ayurveda is still the basis of quite a few programs, and that includes the Journey into Healing Mind Body Workshop, which I highly recommend. It's awesome. It is a good marriage of people from the scientific or medical community with people that are more from this consciousness field, and yogis and master meditators and sages, and these great minds from these different seemingly opposing fields coming together. And Dr. Chopra does that in a very wonderful way, and the people there at the center. So that I recommend that, and that is a lot of what that workshop is based on, is principles from Ayurveda. Um, and of course, this Perfect Health Lifestyle program is as well. Um, and when it comes, even by the end of this lesson, you'll have a pretty good overview of what Ayurveda truly is. But like I said, it's a science. It's a system that was built on this idea of consciousness based um, living. And in Ayurveda, what is considered health is a state of vibrant balance. So this is a balance that you find within when you're centered. It's really a silence that's within that is more of a witness to everything else that's going on in life, as well as a choice maker in terms of how we process and deal with um, our sensual and experiential lives. And so when you have this vibrant balance that is spoken of, then it allows all the different layers and all the different aspects of your life to kind of flow naturally, and that creates a sense of well-being. The sages taught us, and one particular sage that we will get into, Adi Shankara, some of his teachings are central to this program. Um, but they taught us that uh, what you may know of is the body, the mind, and the soul are actually all connected parts of one field of consciousness, one field of intelligence. And essentially the entire universe is, for each one of us individually, as well as a holistic view of all of creation, it all arises from one consciousness, um, and one field of intelligence. And for that reason, this is a thought form universe. This is the thought even within quantum physics these days, that um, our experience of life, everything that is happening in the material and in the unmanifest, everything comes from this one field of consciousness. And so what Ayurveda tries to teach us to focus on is how we are that in a microcosm, and basically that you are this field of energy and information that's self-aware. And the beauty of this concept is that you begin to look at not only yourself but others as more than just their physical appearance or their bodies and their words and the things they do. You know, you start to see that there is a intelligence there that is made up of thoughts and emotions and drives and ambitions and fears and all these things that make us human. Okay. And when you look at it from a certain viewpoint, which is encouraged in Ayurveda, it makes these things easier to process, and you're able to make more conscious choices in how you do so and how you live your life. Um, One of the principles of Ayurveda, as you see here, is this thought that life is multidimensional, and this is something that Adi Shankara focused a lot on. And we'll talk about him in just a second. He was a revivalist of a lot of Vedic thought that lived in the 9th century. Um, but anyway, that our essential nature comes in many forms, and that in fact everything that we experience is in some way connected to, if not a part of, our own field of consciousness, as we are a part of this larger field of consciousness. And we'll get into it a little bit more, and hopefully some of these thoughts will sink in, the best ways that you can process them, because it is a journey. I mean, no one, no matter how knowledgeable they are of this information, or how long they have practiced, can truly claim to have some full, unapproachable knowledge about it. It is a journey. Life is, and that's also that viewpoint is encouraged in this way of life, to understand that you are this unfolding of that energy and that information, that you are this great happening, and that you essentially, at your most centered, still space, are a witness to that and an enjoyer of it. So let's tackle this concept of consciousness. Okay, we have our westernized way that consciousness is talked about and taught in school and such, and I want to show some subtle differences there that actually make all the difference in terms of switching yourself over to incorporate these concepts that come to us from the Vedic culture. Okay, according to Webster's dictionary, consciousness is the quality or state of self-awareness, or being aware of an external object or something within oneself. Now, this definition, by all accounts, is fine. I mean, that does cover somewhat the basis of what consciousness is, but it's a very linear way of defining it. In Ayurveda, it is considered energy and information that is self-aware. Now, they may not sound that different on the surface, but let's take a look at some of the differences that come from these two ways of looking at consciousness. So if we look at the common Western concept or model of consciousness, there's a few little points here that I'd like to show. It all but ignores the question of who you are. Like that, and you could say that with most definitions, especially when they deal with topics related to the spiritual, if you will, or consciousness. Um, it's hard for them to really pin down what we're even talking about when we say consciousness. So it defines it still as if it is something that exists outside of you. Okay, whereas in the Ayurvedic sense, you are the one underlying consciousness that is basically coloring and creating and manifesting everything that you know. Okay, in the Western model, consciousness has no real scientific way of dealing with consciousness. Um, there are great people out there that are working towards um, solving this issue to where we can actually have some kind of technological or scientific basis for what consciousness is, but that's a hard thing to tackle because life in this way, when seen from behind the eyes, is so is so subjective as opposed to being objective and something that you can say we can both agree that this is this shape or this is this color or this texture. It's kind of like we all have our own concept of whatever it is that we experience. So it's hard to really put it in a scientific model, but this is one of the things that we're dealing with in society now. Um, whereas in the Ayurvedic or in the yogic lifestyle, these teachings that come from the East, um, it is pretty much science and technology. When you look at it, meditations are tools um, to tap into these realms they can be seen from a technological standpoint, in the sense that there's something, whether it's a phrase or even when you talk about the different props and things that people use in terms of their meditations and their yoga practices, different individuals can take this one thing, let's say it's a mantra, and all try it out for themselves and all have their own subjective experience. So in that sense, it is a scientific tool, but it's hard to measure. It's hard to translate over into data because we all will have our own personal experiences, and that's kind of the issue with that. Um, but as you see here, I have that the problem with the Western model is that they're trying to find a quantitative way to measure something that's qualitative, which is another way of saying the same thing. Um, whereas with Ayurveda, each person is kind of treated as their own individual, and it's kind of respected that you have your own qualitative experience. And what it seeks to do in the teachings of Ayurveda is to just give you some guidelines, some techniques that you can use to bring more clarity and purify um, your subjective experience. So with all that said, let's look at some things that we can say about consciousness at this point. Um, First of all, as I pointed out, in the Ayurvedic concept of life itself, but especially of consciousness, all of reality is seen as different yet cooperating and coexisting aspects of this one underlying consciousness. Okay, um, and that means you. that includes you as well. And there's a separation there that I think um, a lot of times we're not taught. So it creates this separation of thinking of ourselves as part of this creation. If you look at all of the universe coming from this underlying field, then that means you do too. And there should be something freeing about understanding that. And it's one of the things that Ayurveda teaches you to kind of shift your focus to, and your outlook towards. So actually it will be your in look towards, um, because in doing so, everything starts to make sense in a different way. So um, when you're thinking about this underlying field of consciousness, whether you want to think of it as the universal consciousness, or the divine, um, however you would look at it, you are part of that. You have come out of that or from that as well. Another thing to consider about consciousness is that it is your consciousness which drives all of your existence, all of your experience. Your consciousness is the only constant in life for you, and therefore it really should be the most important thing. If you think about it, no matter what you do, who you're with, or where you may be in time and space, you are the one thing that is always there. You are the one thing that you cannot get away from and shouldn't want to. So through these practices, we're bringing you into a closer relationship with that. We're trying to gear you towards, or steer you towards, seeing that as your true self and allowing that to be the basis for everything. Okay? Your consciousness is fed by your digestion of all of your sensual input. Everything you get from life, the smells, the sights, the sounds, the tastes, everything, the feelings, all your five senses and the input you get from that all go where? To that consciousness. And that consciousness processes it, digests it, sometimes reciprocates something else, or replies to whatever the stimulus is. And that's what Ayurveda is so powerful at doing, is bringing you to a greater awareness of how that consciousness is processing life. Okay? And also, your mind and body are layers of this same one consciousness. So even when we say mind, body, medicine, or we talk about the body, mind, soul, it's really almost a misnomer to speak about these things in this way. They're all one. And that's something that is central to Ayurvedic thinking. They are all one process that is unfolding, that you are experiencing and witnessing. So these teachings come to us from the Vedic culture and the wisdom traditions of the East, where you have this idea, as I've said, of everything being part of this one unified field. And person I mentioned just a minute ago, Adi Shankara, was a revolutionary sage in the study of this wisdom. And one reason why we focus on him is because he gave us a model describing these different multi-dimensional aspects of our life. And they basically break down the physical, psychological, and spiritual, or that mind-body consciousness separation that we've been speaking about, that isn't really a separation. And he gave us a way of looking at that, where you can kind of break it down, but you also can see it as one unified field. Okay. And something that is important that comes also from this culture is this practice of meditation, because it allows you to explore and be a better witness of these different coverings for yourself and for your true nature. Okay, so the Tropa Center has a program where we teach primordial sound meditation. That's the preferred method, but there's different forms of meditation that you can find if you want to do a little self inquiry into it. There's a lot of information out there, and everybody's different. Um, Everybody can find their own way of getting to that still point, that centeredness. But it's important, and it's definitely important to incorporating these things into your personal life, because it's a regular practice of meditation, which helps you to kind of stay within the space where these things make sense in this light. When we look at ourselves the way that Adi Shankara was breaking down, there's basically what would be called, what in Sanskrit is koshas. Koshas. These are coverings to that inner self. Okay, and his breakdown of it had several sub contexts to the mind, the body, and the spirit, or as it was referred to in his teachings, you had the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body, which is important to really. I like the way that that word is used there when we're talking about the spirit or consciousness, the causal body, because that refers back to this idea that everything comes from this space, this ground of our being. Okay, so we're going to break it down. When we're talking about our physical body, it's not just as you might think of as your organs, your skin, such and so forth. These are all part of that, but they're only layers. Okay, the first most present aspect of your physical body, and this is a very Ayurvedic concept and important for us to get. We'll explore it a little bit more in one of the later lessons, is this idea that the environment itself is actually an extension of your body. There is no real separation. It is only a concept that there's a separation between your physical body and the physical world at large. Um, in fact, there's been non-Ayurvedic scientific research done on these how much your skin is interacting with the environment, whether it be literally breathing and excreting through the pores, whether it's shedding and such, how much we absorb through the skin. That in itself should break down that idea that there's some kind of hard line physical boundary that exists. No, it is actually an extension of that centered self, that true consciousness that you are. Okay, and then of course you do have your body, what we think of as our body, your individuated body, and something else that is another layer that is actually pretty prevalent in a lot of the Eastern beliefs, is this idea of the energetic body. The Chinese would call it your chi, this energy field, this vital energy that flows within us. And in Ayurveda, it's thought of in much the same way. It's actually what we would consider prana, and you may have heard this term, especially in these circles of conversation. This idea of prana, which is the vital energy, the vital breath that comes in, this respiration that happens between our inner self and this outer world, and whatever you would want to call that power that connects us, that basically keeps us alive. Okay, it's a little bit more than just air and wind, and the way this is thought of is as prana, and we'll talk about prana a little more in detail. And then there's moving further along on the diagram here, you have your subtle body. Now this is something that in Western culture we're a lot more familiar with, thanks to the studies of sciences like psychology, sociology, um, different integrative medicines and such. We're a little bit more familiar with the mind itself than we are with the spiritual aspects of things. But when we're talking about the subtle body in this concept, it's a slightly different breakdown. And first of all, there's a wisdom in calling the mind the subtle body, but we'll revisit that. Um, the mind itself is not an overall umbrella term is broken down a little further in Adi Shankara's model here. The mind is basically the repository of your emotions and your feelings and your memories. Okay, but then there's another layer to it, which is considered the buddhi, the intellect. Okay, and that's the side of yourself that is discriminating and making choices, and it is a purely just intellectual mechanism, if you will, that decides yum or yuck, light, dark, right, left. Okay, and then of course there's what the part of our mind that most of us are all too familiar with, which is the ego. Um, and it is a slightly different way of looking at the ego in Ayurveda, but I mean, for the most part, we understand the ego is this projection of what we see ourselves as, or how we think of ourselves in relation to others. It's an image, more or less, of how we want to project and how we perceive that which we call ourselves. So now we dig into this causal body, which is the real meat of what Vedic thought uh, focuses on, and it's where things really start to get interesting when we start talking about and exploring this causal body. And within it, there's three divisions, where there's the personal soul. Okay, and this is in this Ayurvedic or actually you could just say Vedic thought, because it does leak over into yoga practices and meditation as well. I don't know if I mentioned, Ayurveda is considered a sister science, if you will, to the yogic. If you might be more familiar with yoga um, as a philosophy, not just as the asana or the practices of it. Philosophically, Ayurveda, it deals a little bit more with diet, nutrition, and routine and things like that. But it is it's sort of like the medical system to go along with yoga, if that makes any sense. It is its own thing, but they are paired together in a lot of households and a lot of traditions from that part of the world. And anyway, in this Vedic way of looking at the personal soul, this is more or less where your sense of um, I am this individual comes from. It's your specific reason for life, your specific drives, your specific likes and dislikes, and all these things. It's the source of that, which I you could say at some point in our development kind of gets rolled up in or confused with the ego, or there's some kind of touching point there, which is actually illustrated in the diagram as well. But it is still quite something different. It's something a little deeper than ego. It's not about the image of that. It's just the source of where our sense of this is who I am comes from. And then there's the collective soul. The collective soul would be considered all of human consciousness, or even if you just want to include all sentient beings, period. There's these energies and there's these emotions and things that as far as we can tell are pretty universal, and that come to us on a personal level and out in our culture and in society, in the form of myths and different archetypes, different concepts of things. Um, most cultures had some kind of deification or personification for something, let's say like lightning. There's a concept, when I say lightning, there's a concept we all have of what lightning is. And some cultures even went so far as to personify that lightning and build stories around it to explain it and to explain what they were experiencing and seeing. And you know, these are common human thread thoughts that we all can relate to, or we all have some kind of basis for, and that's all said to reside in this collective soul um, uh, concept. And then there's the universal soul, the universal part of the causal body. This is really the unknowable. So there's only but so much that can be said, no matter who the teacher is, no matter who the sage or great mind may consider themselves to be, there's only so much that any human being really can say, because it is the unknowable, and it is the part of us that exists outside of anything that we can experience through our senses. It is the basis for all of life and all phenomena that we see. So that's where this universal soul idea comes from. And it is, even as I'm speaking about it, even as it exists in these teachings, an idea, because it's a reality that we all kind of reach for in our own way, and we may, dip our toe in from time to time when we're at our best, most centered place. But it is ultimately just pure potentiality. It's ultimately just this freedom, this consciousness that um, we can all aspire to, and that really creates everything for us. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about this universal soul, and that's the layer of ourselves where, if you do want to look at it in a spiritual context, where we touch the divine, where we experience things that are outside of the norm of our life. A lot of these experiences and these ideas themselves come from this universal layer that we all have. And when we look at these layers, it helps to really see them in the way that Shankara was trying to break them down and classify them to us. As I said before, in Sanskrit, they were called koshas, which are coverings. Okay, that concept in itself is pretty interesting. If you look at who you are, the I am, the presence within you, is the seed source of all, that everything else just kind of covers it up. So I personally like this idea of seeing it as this sheath. Okay, and it's also pretty telling to look at the actual Sanskrit phrases that describe these different layers of us. For instance, the physical body, meaning the literal meat and tendons and nerves of your body, that is considered the Annamaya Kosha. Annamaya Kosha. And that is because that breaks down to the layer derived from food. That's because Shankara recognized that most of our physical body is generated from the nutrients and the more or less the building blocks that we receive from the things we eat. So that's a very important, especially as we move forward in this program. Um, you'll see even more so why. But with Ayurveda, with the specific focus that Ayurveda puts on diet, this becomes that much more important to understand that there's this layer of yourself that is generated largely from the things that you eat and the sensual input that you choose for yourself. So we'll definitely place some importance on this Ana Maya Kosha. Then, as I was speaking about a little while ago about prana, you have the pranamaya kosha, which is speaking about that vital energy, that essence that flows inward and outward as we breathe, and as we go through our lives. The mind, as I said, the repository of our emotions and our memories and stuff, is the mano maya kosha. Then there's this buddhi maya kosha that I spoke about before. This the choice maker or the intellect. Um, a very interesting translation that we get from Sanskrit is ego is ahankara, ahankara, and that means I former. And the reason I say that's interesting is because if you think about life as this ongoing now, this ongoing happening, okay, and who and what you are essentially is that presence that is always in the now, then this concept of our ego, which is more or less our projection of ourselves, our image of ourselves, is an afterthought when looked at as this I former. It is like, I'm processing what's going on now. Right now, you're hearing my voice, for instance, and looking at this PowerPoint. Okay, how you feel about that? What you think, if you think anything at all? What you're wearing? How do you feel right now when you're sitting? All these other thoughts that may flood your mind or may be floating through your mind as you're concentrating on this, um, is all ego. These are all things that are flowing from this ethereal, imaginary self. And the more you meditate, you kind of become a little bit more aware of that. Um, but anyway, ahankara, the I former, not the I am. And hopefully that'll make a little more sense as we go along. And then anyway, this universal consciousness, you may have heard this term before, is considered Brahman. Brahman. And because of some of the beliefs of like Hinduism and different other beliefs, there's this Western idea that Brahman is somehow or another like a deity in the form of like some personified thing that you can say, okay, that's Brahman, in the same way that we may be taught in some Western religions of, oh, this is God, or oh, this is Allah, or this is Brahman. And I bring this up to illustrate the point of it being this universal. It's considered more of an energy. It's a space that everything is existing in. And you may see it personified, but the actual meaning of what Brahman is, or Brahma, is this space, this universal spirit that everything is happening in, the basis for all of existence. And it is brought into this model because this is to hit upon once again the concept of that exists within you. Okay, so that's why it's included as part of who you are at the most grounded universal level. So just to recap this breakdown of our layers and our multi-layered self, when we talk about the physical body, that is the makeup of all our molecules. And that's broken down into environment, which is seen as your extended body, your personal body, which is all the biological intelligence and the structure of who you are, that is largely made from food. If you remember, that's the Annamaya Kosha. And then there's this energetic body, which is your energy. It's the Pranamaya Kosha, and it can be thought of as this electricity, this animating force that goes through you. We'll actually visit some of these topics a little later, but when you talk about your chakras, or some people would call it your spirit man or woman, your this energy field, your aura, all of that flows within and is part of this concept of the Pranamaya Kosha, or your energy body. And once again, we have the subtle body, which is your mind field. And it's the subtle body because it's the background noise, if you will, to the physical, the underlying layer of the physical, which of course is even further underscored and supported through the causal body. But this is your subtle body. And once again, the mind, which receives and stores all your sensory impressions, your intellect, your buddhi maya kosha, which discriminates and makes all the choices in your life. Then the ego, which identifies with the positions and possessions and the comings and goings and doings of your life. And once again, underneath all of this activity of the mind and body, you have the causal body, the source of everything. And that's broken down into your personal, your unique memories or desires, the collective, which is the archetypal energy or the intelligence that underlies everything that we can all relate to. And then you have your universal body, your universal level of self, which is the oneness of all. This is the deepest aspect of your consciousness, and it's beyond time, space, causality, and that's why I said it's really the unknown within ourselves and outside of ourselves. And as I said before, meditation is a useful tool in exploring these different layers of ourselves. And it's useful because It allows us to experience these expanded states of awareness. It allows us to um, sit in and be in the silence that exists in our in between our thoughts and the activities of our bodies and minds. Um, and it's just good in general for us to spend some time with ourselves. It's something that not enough of us do in our daily lives, especially in Western culture. So I cannot stress the importance of how much meditation can affect your life and how important it is to even solidify yourself as a um, conscious choice maker, as a captain of your own life, if you will. So, a very important tool, meditation is, and we're going to cover a little bit on meditation. Although this course is not specifically on meditation, since it is so important, we are going to do a couple little short meditations um, as part of what you're learning. So, if you're not familiar with meditation, there are a few experiences that you will have during meditation, and none of them are wrong. That's one of the downfalls of a lot of people who are interested in it or passively get into meditation and want to learn more, and they do it, and it's like, oh, this isn't working, or what is this stuff? I mean, I don't get it, you know. Um, the list goes on, and most of the time it's because people are not being properly educated in it to know. And so I want to inform you that, like, it's okay if you go to sleep, for instance, during your meditation. It's okay if your thoughts just continue to run on and run on. um, it's okay if you're using a mantra, if you just kind of repeating these affirmations or these mantras the whole time, and you're like, well, what was that about? I didn't really get nothing out of that. There's all types of um, possibilities when we step into this realm of meditation, but these four are pretty common and they're all to be expected. Either you're going to repeat the mantra, or you're going to have these just wild random thoughts that you're not really going to pay any attention to. You're just going to witness them. Okay, that would be ideal. Don't follow the thoughts. Just kind of let them come and go like clouds in the sky. You may fall asleep, especially if you're sleep deprived. And many of us find that we are more sleep deprived than we realize. Um, when we begin a meditation practice, you may find yourself falling asleep pretty often. But eventually that'll settle in, and especially if you get yourself in tune um, with nature and with the life cycles. We'll cover that a little more in the perpetual renewal lesson. Um, you get yourself more in tune with these rhythms that are going on, then you will find that you will be less sleep deprived and more attentive during your meditations. But it's okay if you fall asleep at first. And then there's also this experience that has been described as the gap. Um, One of our great teachers and a mentor, David G. He talks a lot about slipping into this gap, and it's this space where you kind of just lose your sense of anything. You're kind of just there. A lot of times people experience it as like similar to the if you've ever had to go under during like a surgery or something. It's like you're there one minute, you kind of feel yourself drift off, and then it's like, whoa, what just happened? The gap has been described as that, or like this being in this zone. And you'll know. I mean, I'm sure it's different for all of us to some degree, but and it's like you come out of your meditation and you know that you brought something back from somewhere, that your mind went or your spirit went. And so there's that gap experience too. Um, but don't be worried if you don't necessarily have anything come to you in that way, or that you're not that out of it. You may be completely aware that you're just sitting still and not doing anything for the entire meditation as well. That's also normal. So don't put too much pressure on yourself as you're learning to meditate and exploring these things, because there's no set guidelines to it. There's no certain way you have to sit and do. There's things that work and work well and have been, uh, tried and true tested methods for centuries that you may be instructed in. But in terms of put your own style on it, whatever makes you comfortable, whatever uh, allows you to slip into that space, go for it. It's completely allowable. There are no set guidelines. The important part is just meditating and building a practice and making it a regular routine in your life, because there's so many benefits to it. There's a lot of research being done and having been done over the last few decades about the effects of meditation on stress. And we all know how many different diseases and conditions there are out there that are just destroying people. You may even have experiences in your own life that are largely stress related or stress induced. And so that's one major way that meditation has just been just this awesome tool that's come to us from the ancient world, that people can free themselves from these conditions through the use of meditation. And we'll explore a little further into these benefits of meditation in later lessons. But a few things that can be said about it right away is that it does lower your blood pressure. There's a lot of study being done now on how it helps regulate your mental and biological functions, and that's something that's very interesting to stop and take a look at. We go back to this idea of being this multi-layered being, and all of that coming from this one consciousness, which is your true self. Well, look at what happens when you give that a time out, when you give yourself some time in that silent witness state of mind, when you allow yourself to just be at your core, at your center, and not so active in what's going on in your body and your mind, and you're just kind of witnessing and being in that stillness and peace. Well, everything starts to kind of mellow out and flow as it needs to on its own automatically. That's a important aspect of Ayurvedic teaching, is to understand that um, we have these fluctuations, and that's a lot of what we experience is stress and things like that. But it's all kind of operating on its own. You are the consciousness that is witnessing that is experiencing that is living that. But if you're always living it, with your face right in it, so to speak, if you're always living life thinking that you're doing everything and having to do everything, you never really give it a chance to run smoothly like it was designed to do. Your body is this wonderful, amazing creation that is doing billions of different processes at any given point in time that you're not aware of. And it's all flowing fine. Your fingernails are growing, your heart beats, um, your blood vessels are contracting and expanding as they should. Everything's running smoothly. Well, meditation allows you to take that same intelligence, allow that same kind of intelligence that is regulating the life and death and rebirth of your cells, and everything else that's regulating all of your life, um, to operate in other aspects of what we think of as our life. We take a little break from being inside our heads and allow our mind to clear its own junk out and kind of work its own self out. So like I said, we'll be going a little further into these things in later lessons, but it's good to know that by coming to this subtler aspect of ourself, we see how powerful our entire self really is. And this is a benefit that comes from meditation. So while I'm saying all these great things about meditation, we're going to pause for a second and actually take the time to look at this multi-layered self, to get in tune with this identity of being a witness to these different aspects. So when we go into meditation, it's good for us to ask ourself, our inner consciousness, these soul questions. And these are four that we use within the Chopra Center system. As you develop your own practice, you may want to do your own spin on some of these questions or add others to it. Not to make it a task, but just because they do have a place in your experience, as you will see. And these soul questions are: who am I? What do I want? How may I serve? And what am I grateful for? So if you want to try this, what we'll do, I'd like everyone to get comfortable, close your eyes, and begin to breathe deeply. And after a few breaths, start to ask yourself inwardly in silence, who am I? Who am I? What do I want? What do I want? How may I serve? How may I serve? What am I grateful for? What am I grateful for? Keeping your eyes closed, just take a few slow, deep breaths and allow these questions to go into that silence, into that stillness. And allow the answers to effortlessly come up to the surface. If you do not receive your answers right away, that is okay. That is in fact normal. The intention here is to pose the questions to your inner self. Who am I? What do I want? How may I serve? What am I grateful for? After taking a few moments in this silence, in this space, you can release the questions and slowly open your eyes. Now remember, while that was only a couple minutes of meditation, or a few moments, um, you may have had some experience, you may not, especially in that short of a meditation. And we'll get into this a lot more in detail in other lessons, but these are the experiences that you will have, and it's okay wherever you may fall on this spectrum. And that is just which this one didn't have a mantra, so to speak. In a way, you could say the questions were acting as a mantra, but that's just repeating that. You may just have had thoughts. You can also begin to drift off, and sometimes that drifting can lead to falling asleep. Although in an ideal practice, you would remain conscious in a waking state in that stillness, but you can also fall asleep, and that's perfectly fine. But moving along, we will begin to get into some of these Ayurvedic principles and some of the basis of where this teaching comes from. So one of the sources actually of these teachings is this Vedic text called the Upanishads, and it's a collection of stories and texts that basically lays out most of what we know of is the yogic thought, or these teachings of Ayurveda. And here's a great quote that actually comes from one of the Upanishads. It says, "As is the human body, so is the cosmic body. As is the human mind, so is the common mind. As is the microcosm, so is the macrocosm. As is the atom, so is the universe." And while this may just be one quote from the Upanishad, it kind of gives you an idea of what level of thought we're dealing with here. And it's important as we move forward, because in the next part of this lesson, we'll be covering the elemental composition of the universe, and therefore of yourself. So it's good to keep in mind this concept, because it's all throughout not only this lesson, but all of our Ayurvedic theory, that you and the universe are one, and therefore these phenomenon that go on in your outer world, and these elements that are present in your outer world are also they're also present within you in some way. When we're looking at the outer world of phenomenon and the natural world, you see these five elements, and you're probably familiar with them. There's some form or some understanding of these five elements in virtually every culture and civilization around the world, and there's a reason for that, because they're seen as the essential building blocks of nature. And these five elements are space, air, fire, water, and earth. And these are very important to the rest of what we're going to go over, not only in this lesson, but to all of Ayurvedic philosophy. They're very important. They play their role in not only how you understand yourself and what you experience, but in what you eat and so forth. So here's some Sanskrit translations for these elements, and you will hear me refer to them periodically, whether it be in the Sanskrit form or in the English word. But space in Sanskrit is akasha, and this is thought of as the potential, the pure potential in everything. Air is considered vayu. You may also hear it referred to as prana, but the basic element itself is vayu, and that is the element of change. Then you have fire, which in Sanskrit is tejas. You will also hear a form of fire, a very specific reference to fire called Agni. Agni, but we'll deal with that a little more. For the purposes of just describing the element of fire, it is known as Tejas, and that's the transformational principle of nature. Then you have the cohesive principle of nature, which is water. If you think about how water dilutes, binds, mixes, and so forth, that's why water is considered a cohesive aspect of nature. And in Sanskrit, that is jala. Jala. Earth in Sanskrit is Prithvi. Prithvi. And that is the solid block, the forming substance or aspect of substance, if you will. That's the element that is all about form and protection and solidity. So that is earth, and in Sanskrit that is said as Prithvi. So let's go over these elements in a little more detail. We all, I'm sure, feel like we are familiar with space, air, water, fire, earth, and what they may mean to us in the physical sense. But it's also the qualities of these elements and the characteristics of these elements where you'll really see this stuff translate into practices for your lifestyle and how you view the things you eat and the things you do. So when we're talking about space, you know, it is this potential. Okay, that's one quality of space that we're talking about is potential. It's this open expanse. It's empty. It creates the need to be filled, which is important. You can put a pin in that when we go a little further into these elements. Remember that space is like this vacuum. And on the other side of that, or the result of its presence, there's a need to be filled. And that's filled with matter or activity. And that's where a lot of these other elements come into play. Space is the space between galaxies just as much as it is space when it is in between your cells. And because it is a vacuum, because it does create this need for activity, it also functions as a medium. And that's for information and energy. And as we're speaking on today, for consciousness to be present. So space is actually very important, although you may think of it as just emptiness. In the Eastern way of looking at things, space is one of the most important elements. And it is within this space that you see the emergence of movement. You know, when we think of space, it's just the stillness. But as movement appears in space, it creates vayu, which is the animating force of life. This air, okay? And you could think of it in the external sense as wind. But internally, it's the circulation of your blood, and all other processes going on. It's your nerve impulses, and we'll revisit this concept of vayu. See, air, while it may not on the surface have any real connection to electricity, and this Ayurvedic concept is very closely related because of the quality similarities to electricity and communication. So this vayu, with it being the primary biological way that we are communicating, our inner self is communicating with the outer self. In this way, it also covers like the communication between our cells and our brains, and as I said, our nervous system, circulatory system. Anything that is moving according to this principle of vayu. And the natural progression when there is movement, especially in the absence of water or any other lubricating element, is fire because of the friction, right? And so this is the natural progression of the elements coming into being as it's handed down to us from the Vedic text. You had space, then you had a fluctuation, you had a vibration, which is movement within that space. So you get your Vayu, and then from Vayu, once it is enough, the friction caused by Vayu brings about the emergence of Tejas, which is fire. Now, externally, you can think of fire, of course, is what we know as fire, which we see and experience, but also the sun or anything that involves radiating force. It's heat, it's light. In the qualitative standpoint that we're going to take, you could think of anything that is transformational as having this element of fire within it. And internally, when you're talking about your physical being, that's anything that is digestive in nature. The interesting part, and then as I've said, we're going to be talking a lot, especially in regards to these elements from a qualitative standpoint. Okay, so when you think of fire as occupying anything or being woven into anything that is digestive and transformational, well, that also includes the fire of your mind, so to speak. Because as you process life, as you process these sensual inputs, as you process information, there is something that is digesting that. The firing of the neurons in your mind. You see, you have that Vayu going, and this activity is producing that fire, or in some cases is even a result of that fire. And that is Tejas going on within your body. Next, as that activity cools and calms down, you have this emergence of Jala, or water. And the water element, from a qualitative standpoint, is the element in life that connects things, that binds things, that is nourishing. So in Ayurveda, we consider any activity that brings about structure, helps build structure, that is lubricating, that is transporting, or once again, that is allowing for cohesion to be exhibiting this element of water. Okay, and so you can look at like your biomolecular processes that are going on inside your body, your cellular processes that are going on, as being fueled or nourished by this water principle in your body. And as we know from modern science, the body is vastly, there's different numbers thrown out there, but anywhere from 70 to 75% water is known scientifically. And so this is a very important element. And you can see why just from the things that are mentioned here. The element that is holding you together physically, the element that is allowing for things to flow, which the flow itself is due to the Vayu principle, as I pointed out, the air principle, but the channel, if you will, by which this flow is happening is considered water within your body. And all the nutrients that are coming about from the processes going on, these nutrients are traveling through your body and being absorbed into your body through this water principle. So there's a lot that can be said about Jala, and so it's one of the elements that we focus on quite a bit. And you'll notice when we move on in this lesson that it is actually the only element that is featured in more than one dosha. But we'll talk about what doshas are in a second. But before we get there, the last physical manifestation, if you will, of the elemental source is earth. which once again in Sanskrit is Prithvi. And this is the substance, the mass, the form of physical nature, the ground, I guess, if you will. So that's how it ties into literally into the earth, the dirt, um, everything physical that is in nature is said to have this element of Prithvi. In the outer world, you see that in planets, mountains, rocks, like I said, anything solid. In the inner world, you see this is the solidifying aspects of your body. The body itself, anything that you can touch that is solid. So that's your muscles, your tendons, your bones, your cartilage. And in a sense, when we're talking about the subtle body, okay, um, or the mental, our mental life, you can think of things that are grounding, things that are of a concrete nature within our character. These things all have that element of earth to them. Now, the way that these ideas about the elements apply to Ayurveda and the way that we bring all this together in cultivating our lifestyle is through this concept of doshas. Now, in Ayurvedic theory, there are three doshas, and the doshas are more or less the pairings that these elements naturally gravitate towards when given full space and potentiality. So, like space and air naturally group up together, and that grouping, that happening, is what is known as vata, and that governs all movement in the body and outside the body, in the mind, and all aspects of the universe. The pairing of space and air is considered vata. Then, as I pointed out earlier, the water kind of played both sides of this situation here. When water groups with fire, it forms the dosha pitta, which governs all transformation, change, digestion. Okay, and it has a very vital role in everything. Actually, all of these do. All the elements do, as well as their pairings. They're present in everything, and that's why this is broken down this way, so that we can kind of itemize it out and pick it apart. But the way that they show themselves and express themselves in us, in life, is all of them. You just may have a more of one element or the other, or you may have a little bit more of this activity going on than the next person. So that's how you get these different mind body constitutions. Okay, but they're also visible out in the natural world as well. We're going to primarily be talking about how these doshas um, affect you as an individual and other humans, but there's vata, pitta, kapha being expressed in everything. So as I was saying, when fire and water pair together, you have pitta, which is this transformational aspect of life. And then when water wants to pair with earth, then you have mass and solidity coming together. Then you have like a physical construct. You have that cohesive nature of water coming together with that solid mass of earth, and you get what is called kapha, which its primary objective is protection. If you think about all the physical structures, all the kapha that goes on in your body, um, it's to protect or to provide structure for whatever it may be. If we revisit the different expressions of Prithvi, you're talking about your bones, or you're talking about your muscles, your ligaments. These are all solid structures within your body, and that's where the earth comes in. But they also hold your body together. Your concept of what your physical body is. So that's that water nature coming into play, and that's to protect your organs or protect whatever this is that is within us that is having this experience. So that's your kapha dosha. So just to revisit, you have vata, pitta, and kapha, and we'll go into a little more detail. A little more detail with each one, because um, each dosha kind of has its own qualities, and once again, the qualities are where the real wisdom come into play. Okay, so as I'm going through these things, pay attention to the qualities of these elements in these doshas. With the vata, primary functions, movement, once again, transportation. Now, the qualities of vata are cold, light, dry, irregular, meaning somewhat like chaotic, kind of all over the place, rough, mobile, obviously for movement purposes, quick, changeable, not static, changeable. Okay, so these qualities are important because you will see these qualities play themselves out in yourself and in the different processes that you witness. That's always vata. When you see anything cold or light or dry, when you see things that are quick moving, these are all the play of vata within that experience. You can see vata play out in your own self and in others through certain qualities. And that goes for all these doshas. Like with vata, we're talking about resembling the wind. Once again, that movement principle. So people who are real quick and quick, fast talking people, kind of jumpy all over the place, have this kind of chaotic nature. I wouldn't necessarily say chaos because it has this negative connotation, but just kind of just all over the place. Um, uh, some of the other characteristics of Vata is they resist routine. Okay, they always welcome new experiences, which plays into why your mind might go from one subject to the other in a matter of a few seconds. Some of the physical things that come along with Vata is having a tendency to have cold hands and feet. You or someone may show that, and they just, even when it's not necessarily a cold day, they just have like their extremities feel cold, or like they have a numbness, and different things like that. There's normally a dryness to a Vata. Their skin and hair feels dry. They're normally pretty light sleepers. Vatas are, and that has to do with that changeability and that excitement and that part of their nature that is just always looking for the next thing to do or think or experience. So these are some things that come along with that Vata principle. When these characteristics are imbalanced, it's generally a good thing, and you can say that for all the doshas. That when they're in balance, these create good characteristics in people. But as you'll also see, when they're imbalanced, you may recognize some of those symptoms as well. So some of the symptoms of a balanced Vata is they're energetic, creative. That's a big thing for Vata. Adaptable. They show initiative because they're always ready for the next thing. Okay. Vadas are generally good communicators because they're quick talkers. Communication is their thing. Remember, they have that extra principle of air going on, that extra value that plays its role. So that makes them great communicators. And once again, they're spontaneous, which in general is a great quality, right? But when it's out of balance, here's some of the negative sides of having Vata in your makeup. Um, Imbalanced Vata will have an overactive mind. It's good to have an active mind. You don't want to have an overactive mind, right? Because that keeps you from actually doing anything. We'll talk about that a little more too. It also can make you anxious. So anxiety is an imbalanced quality of Vata. Worrying, inconsistency, and that goes across the board. If you have inconsistency in your digestion, even that is a Vata, that is an out of balance Vata quality showing itself. Um, as well as constipation, because that's not enough Vata, not enough movement. Okay, and gas and bloating, anything air related, is also a sign of out of balance Vata. And each of these doshas have their own sub doshas, if you will. And here I have listed some of the Sanskrit terms to describe these sub-doshas. Prana, which you've heard this word already, and you will continue to hear it throughout this course. Um, Although it has different meanings at different times, in this case, we're kind of referring to prana more as the common noun. And before, as I'm referring to it as the vital energy, you could think of that as like the proper noun, prana, capital P, prana, so to speak. But the prana subdosha of vata governs perception, inspiration, and thought. The next one is udana, which covers speech. Okay, and if you think about not only the vibrating of your vocal cords, but the air that is needed in order for you to speak out, this is what we're talking about when we're talking about udana vata. Then there's samana vata, which is the principle of peristalsis within you. And this would be like the regulation of the different processes going on in your body and your mind as well. There's apana vata subdosha, which governs the elimination of waste, menstruation, and sexual function. And I will mention here also that the vata domain of your body is below your belly button and the rest of your body, because if you think about that from a common sense perspective, okay, that would be where a lot of the movement for the entire mechanism of your body takes place, whether you're talking about your feet and your legs, that kind of movement. If you think about excreting, and as I said, your menstruation and sexual function, that's movement, that's connection, that's communication, things of this nature. And you'll find that a lot of these little wisdoms that come across from Ayurvedic principle or Ayurvedic theory is a lot of it's very common sense. Some of it gets on a higher level of technology and a way of looking at it, but it's very common sense knowledge, and that's what makes it so powerful. Okay, is the simplicity of it. So if you want to think about apana vata, just know that the vata domain, the main is present throughout all of your body and all of nature, but the domain of vata in your body is below the navel. So that's an easy way to connect vata to movement. Okay, but the subdosha of vata that governs that specific area is apana. And then you also have vyana vata, which governs all your circulation processes. The next dosha is pitta, which is a pairing of fire and water. The functions of pitta are transformation and metabolism. So if you can imagine this pairing of fire with its destructive or transformation principles, its metabolizing and processing of things, and then water through the power of, say, like dilution and things of that nature. They're both transformational elements, and that's why when they come together, you get this very strong doshic presence that we call pitta. Now, here's a few qualities of pitta. That's hot, light. Light is in radiance. If you remember, light is in weight is related to vata. But light in terms of like light from the sun is a pitta quality or fire. Intensity, penetrating, pungency, sharpness, acidity, and the moisture comes in because of the water quality. But these are some of the qualities to look for in the pitta dosha. And as I've said before, when it comes to vata, all the doshas, these qualities can show themselves both in a physical and in a non-physical way, in our character, in the way we process life. So when you think about someone who's fiery, a fiery personality or fiery by nature, obviously there's a lot of good qualities that can come out of that when it's in balance. So if we take a look at this here, we can look at some of these characteristics. This is how someone who is a pitta dosha, how they normally are expressed. Their characteristics are they normally have a medium build. If you'll remember, Vata is normally a lighter framed person. Well, Pitta is normally a medium build, generally muscular or a little bit more toned, strong digestion. This is the person who can, at the right time of day, can eat virtually anything and as much of anything as they want. So they normally have a good appetite. Um, warm uh, body temperature. These are fiery people. So if you just think about all those different things, or maybe someone you know or yourself who would be described as fiery, you know, some of these characteristics should line up. Um, Pitta sleeps soundly, but for short periods of time. Vata has a very light sleep. And as you'll see, Kapha, these are sound sleepers. So when we're talking about Pittas, we're talking about people who they sleep pretty good, but they don't sleep long. Okay, a Pitta has a sharp intellect, and that comes from that very cutting, logic and a very fast-paced way of their brain processing things. These are all qualities that come to us through that fiery nature. Um, Very direct and precise when it comes to getting things done. They stay close to their routine, and Pittas are generally courageous people, brave. You know, they don't shy away from the fight, and in fact, in a lot of ways, they bring the fight, depending on the situation. So these are things that are Pitta qualities. When these things are balanced, they create good leaders. They have strong digestion, as I mentioned. They make great decision makers, because this is the person who, when they're confronted with a issue or problem, they kind of take a direct control. Bam, bam, this is how we're going to get this done. That's normally your Pitta, is the person who in the room who will automatically go to that mode. Okay, and regardless of what other people may think, or you know what appearances may be, this is the person who will want to take charge. Okay, that's your Pitta type personality, and that's because, you know, at least within their mind, within their consciousness, they are quick to make a decision, and they'll deal with whether it's the right or wrong decision after the fact. It's about limiting confusion. They're not going to wait around. They're just ready to get down to it. So that's your Pitta. Okay, and obviously they're bright, warm, and friendly people. When this is in balance, these are all good qualities, and there are some others. But this is the general line of thinking on Pitta nature. When it's imbalanced, and this is what a lot of us may be a little more familiar with when you're talking about this dosha quality, a Pitta can be angry, irritable, excessively critical. That goes back to that fiery nature, that biting intellect. Okay, that cutting intellect. So that can make them excessively critical, judgmental, aggressive. Um, Physically, they can tend towards skin rashes and inflammation, and also indigestion, where they have that Pitta fire going on in their body that is out of line with their diet, or what have you. So these are some qualities to look for in Pitta, and we'll cover some sub-doshas of Pitta as well, because as I was mentioning before with the Vata sub-doshas, the sub-doshas kind of cover these specific tasks that these doshas take care of in our body, and they're the same for all of us, regardless of whether we come out to be a Vata, a Pitta, or Kapha dosha. This is the presence of those doshas in all of us, and you'll see that each dosha covers certain domains within the body and certain functions within the body, regardless of what your overall dosha is. So when we talk about Pitta sub-doshas, each one has 5. And more can be said about each of these sub-doshas that come up under each one of these dosha categories. But for the purposes of this course and general practicing of Ayurveda in your life. You don't necessarily need to go that much deeper into just knowing that these are functions. These are the categories of the functions that these doshas are present. So with pitta, you have sadaka pitta, and that governs heart function and memory. Okay, so that governs. Um, when you think about pitta, it helps to once again go back to the transformational quality of pitta, as well as the digestive property of pitta. Okay, so anywhere in your body that you have this processing, this high level of processing of information or nutrients, you're going to see the presence of pitta, at least in part. So with sadhaka, you're talking about the way that your heart functions, the spark that keeps your heart going, as well as your memory, which in your brain is that processing of your experience and the senses, the sensual input that is coming in. So that all falls under sadhaka pitta. Then you have alochaka pitta, which is our visual perception, which is a very fast-paced, at least in a healthy, functional adult or the healthy, functional person. You have this very fast-paced processing that goes on within the eyes and behind the eyes of everything that is seen. So that falls under alochaka pitta, that fire behind the eyes. You have pachaka pitta, which is your digestion of nutrients. So naturally that's going on within the gut. And that one comes back. All of these are important, but certain ones are a little bit more important to diet than others. And that's one of them that we come back to later on in our journey with Ayurveda. You have Ranjaka pitta, which governs blood chemistry, nutrient levels, and detoxification. Also very important, especially because of the detoxification factor. Okay, once again, you have that processing, that smelting in the fire, if you will, of the different biochemicals that go through your body, and that's Ranjaka pitta plays the role in that, and that has a lot to do with the heat, also within the blood. That falls within Ranjaka. Then you have Brajaka pitta, and that has to do with your complexion, and you'll notice that some people have a redder complexion than others, and regardless of actual skin color, there's that redness, that pigmentation that differs between individuals, and that would be the presence of Brajaka pitta. It's very important because, like I said, it governs the temperature, the heat quality of our skin, and there's a whole range of things that fall under that very important function, as far as how we relate to our environment and such. So you have Sadhaka, Alochaka, Pachaka, Ranjaka, and Brajaka. And last but definitely not least, we have this Kapha dosha, which is the pairing of water and earth. Now, the primary functions, as stated before, of Kapha are protection, stabilization, structural integrity, and all matters that deal with physicalness and compactness. And you can see that very easily from looking at your own knowledge of the qualities of earth primarily, but also earth with water, because of water's cohesiveness. So some of the inner and outer qualities of Kapha fall under the domain of these properties. You have cold, and that means cold natured, both in body temperature, as far as and also tendency towards cold and ability to handle cold. These are things that can come along with a Kapha dosha. Heaviness, and that is both in mood and in physical weight. Solid, stable, smooth, as opposed to Vada's rough. And we'll talk a little bit more about the actual interplay and relationships of these doshas one to another in a later lesson, but um, you will see that there are opposites within the three doshas, and this affects how they balance each other out and such. So anyway, we come back to Kapha with the smoothness, slow, steady, and that's pace. And one place where that's very important to pay attention is in steady digestion. Okay, because as I said before, with Ayurveda, a lot of this has to do with our nutrition and our diet. So Kapha tends to have a pretty regular, pretty steady digestive process that they go through from the time they eat to the time they eliminate. So, and then also Kaphas tend to have a lot of stamina. You know, they may be a little slower paced, but they're steady. They're sure, and they most definitely are strong enough to get to the places that they want to go in life. So these are things that come along with that Kapha nature. Some of the common qualities of Kapha that come to us through this fusion of earth and water are Kapha people tend to be heavy set, and that's not necessarily in terms of necessarily overweight, but just bigger in nature. And that could be muscle mass, height, you know, just bigger people are generally, that's a Kapha quality that's showing itself in them. Also smooth skin and thick hair, normally nice, luscious, oily skin and hair, because that is also a form of that water quality showing itself within them quite naturally. And there's a deep sound sleep. This is a person who could sleep most of the time if they were allowed to. You know, this is a person who can sleep throughout the day, any time of day, and go into this deep restful sleep without a problem. That would be your Kapha nature showing. They're slow moving, good stamina once again, generally easygoing, and even keel. Kaphas have this natural sweet nature to them, and we'll talk a little bit more about why you see sweet in particular um, show up in Kapha. That'll play a role as we talk about diet. But anyway, you have this easygoing, pretty friendly personality generally when it comes to Kaphas. They're methodical and thoughtful in nature, which also plays back into that slow-moving quality, where there's more time for reflection and consideration of different aspects of whatever the scenario is. And this is the way a Kapha goes about life. You know, and then when they move, and it's normally a good, strong movement in a steady movement. It's supported by their whole being, but in the process, they're a lot slower than Vadas and Pittas. And Kaphas tend to enjoy their routines, as opposed to Vata, who cannot stand routine. It's like prison to them to have to be locked into a routine. And then Pittas, they enjoy their routine as long as it suits their purposes. You know, it's all about getting it done when it comes to a Pitta. And so with Kaphas, they can very easily get stuck in their ways because they do like that regularity. Okay, and that's another form of that stamina showing itself. When these Kapha qualities are in balance, you have steadiness, consistency, loyalty, strength. They're very supportive because, as I said, a Kapha is normally a sweet-natured person, very caring and nourishing and motherly towards those that are around them and towards themselves. So you have this supportive nature. In general, they're content and very calm. And that contentment also plays back into this, you know, may resist change and enjoying their routine. Okay, because Kapha generally isn't really wanting for too much, as long as they have their comforts and their things that they're used to going on. So that allows them to be more content and calm in their life. Now, when Kapha is imbalanced, you see a lot of these other more negative qualities, if you will, that come into play. There's dullness, there's inertia. Kapha can be very needy and attached in their relationships with friends and family. There's a lot of congestion, and that's one way that it can show itself physically, as well as being overweight. When you have sinus issues, or you feel this heaviness in your head. And by the way, when we're talking about Kapha, and we'll get into this as we talk about the subdoshas next, but the domain of Kapha, as I told you earlier, Vata is kind of below the navel, and then Pitta, as you would imagine, especially as it being the home of the digestive fire, um, its domain would be from your navel to about your rib cage or so, and then Kapha would be from the chest area up. Okay, so when you have the sinus congestion, going back to that, um, or you have this heaviness in your head, this feeling of dullness. You think about some of the sites of where you actually see these qualities play out in your life, and it's easiest to see the imbalanced ones, I think. But when you the physical home of Kapha in general is from the chest up. The specific subdoshas of Kapha are as follows. You have Tarpika Kapha, which is supporting your brain and your spinal cord. Remember, Kapha is all about support, protection, nourishment, things of this nature. So under Tarpika Kapha, we're talking about the tissues as well as the literal spinal column that is protecting that nervous system. And then we have Bodhika Kapha, which governs your perception of taste. We have Kledaka Kapha, which deals with the lubrication of your digestive tract. And these two specifically will come into play as we go along, and we'll touch on things related to it when we talk about your how you eat, um, and the roles of taste in that building up that regimen. So these two are pretty important subdoshas, and that is Kledaka and Bodhika Kapha. Then you have Avalambaka Kapha. This is protecting your heart, your lungs, your lower back. When you think about this function of Kapha, you can kind of relate that to your chest cavity, your center mass. Then you have Sleshaka Kapha, which has to do with the lubrication of your joints. Very important, especially as we get older in life, to maintain a healthy balance of this subdosha of Kapha. Um, to keep your bones and everything from rubbing together and or being brittle, you need this presence of Kapha there. So that falls under the category of Sleshaka Kapha. So once again, that's Tarpaka Kapha, Bodhika Kapha, Kledaka Kapha, Avalambaka Kapha, and Sleshaka Kapha. Now that we've gone over these different qualities of the doshas, now remember that's Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, um, we're going to do a quiz here. You'll find it in your workbook. And if you do not have that available for some reason, you can also find that online. Just contact us and we can set you up with it. And there's different dosha quizzes out there. Obviously, we're going to go with the one presented to us from the Chopra Center. But it's good to know what your particular constitution is when it comes to these. It can show you a lot about your own personality, how you relate to life, how others relate to you. It's a very valuable part of the Ayurvedic system. So we're going to kind of get into what your particular makeup might be. Now, when we're talking about doshas, there is a breakdown a little bit of the different kinds of dosha, I guess you will. You have your prakruti, which is the dosha that you were more or less born with. That is the dosha that was formed when, at the very moment of conception, when it comes to your particular life, you were kind of given, and in this system, it has a lot to do with what your parents' doshas are. Okay, so it's the elements and the elemental makeup of your parents. As soon as they come together, that is determined for you and set for you because of their elements. So that would be your prakruti. Okay, and that's made up of all three doshas. We are all made up of all three doshas and all these elements. But when we're talking about your prakriti, this is what predominates in your life. These are the elements or the combination of elements that predominates. And that's why, as I was going through the different doshas, I was speaking of people who might be vata, pitta, or kapha. Because when you say you're a pitta person, for instance, you still have these kapha qualities, these vata. They're all necessary for the overall functioning of your life and your body, but you may have a bigger presence of fire and water, or the combining of fire and water going on, and so that's why you would be categorized as a pitta, for instance. So, and then the other category of your dosha reading would be considered vikruti, and that has to do with what's going on right now. Because see, dosha actually can be translated as imbalance, and that's just to say that when you have all these elements going on and all occupying the same space, which is your body and mind, there's constantly going to be something that's out of balance. It needs to be brought back into balance. Okay, that's the nature of life. Don't get caught up in the idea of being imbalanced as we speak about it in this course, because while you may be in balance or be able to balance a imbalance that you have going on, it is only temporary. The elements are constantly dancing and interplaying with each other, and once you understand that and you become conscious of how to deal with that, then you can find this vibrant health that we speak about and encourage when it comes to Ayurveda. So Vikruti is very important because you may have a Vata kind of day or a Kapha kind of morning. You may have a prevalence of Pitta at work or certain situations, so it's good to understand that none of these things are static, okay, and they shouldn't be. The more static they are, the more likely there is to be health problems and other issues going on in your life. So you kind of want things to flow and have a nice healthy balance of every element. So when we talk about what's going on in your now, or this particular instant situation or what have you, we're talking about Vikruti. And when you do the quiz to discover your personal dosha, you'll have these two categories to deal with. Now, in general, especially if you want to categorize your own self, then Prakruti will be your main concern there. Your Prakriti can actually give you several different possibilities as far as your doshic your makeup. So of course you have the three, Vata, Pitta, and Kapha, but you can also be bidoshic, which means you would be some combination of these. As you can see here, that would be Vata, Pitta, or Pitta, Vata, depending on which one's stronger of the two. Pitta, Kapha, or Kapha, Pitta, Kapha, Vata, or Vata, Kapha. Or you can also be all three, and that's a very rare condition, but that would be considered tridoshic. Okay, so there's plenty of room for diversity when it comes to these doshas, and you'll see each of these play out in not only yourself but in others the more aware you become of them. So at this point, we're going to stop and give yourself time to fill out this questionnaire so that we can figure out what your particular dosha is. And as you're answering the questions, please try to answer them in such a way where you're speaking about what you may be going on generally, especially with the Prakriti questions. You want to answer them as if you're speaking for the majority of your life. Okay, and then when you come to the Vikriti section, you're going to be answering these questions as far as what's going on right now or recently in your life, and that'll help your results be a little more accurate and more relevant. So, with section 1, you're dealing with this Prakriti, um, and these results will tell you what your overarching dosha and doshic tendencies are. They can change, but in general, this is pretty much the category that you would fall under in the Ayurvedic system throughout your life. And then section 2, the Vikriti, these are things that they change all the time. You can actually go through several dosha phases within one day. It's very likely that you will, and we'll explain that a little bit more as we go along and in later lessons. The importance of the Vikriti um, reading will be when we talk about this balance that you can come up with for yourself through your practices, your routines, your diet and such. This is where Vikriti comes into play, because that's a way of that's how you can gauge where, when, and how to balance yourself in the moments. Um, that's where you could do things such as using a dosha tea or diet, using certain spices and herbs, taking certain actions. Um, that's going to all be acting on your now. And even if it has a longer term effect of balancing you or bringing you back into balance with your Prakriti, um, Vikriti is going to be the way to do so. It's going to be our snapshot of what's going on. So keep these things in mind. Take your time and honestly fill out this questionnaire, and you will uh, hopefully get the results that will help you make sense of yourself and the rest of the information that you're going to be getting from this course and from this line of thinking. And if you have any questions with filling that questionnaire out or with the results you get from it, please do not hesitate to email us or contact us so we can give you some assistance with that. Um, your doshic makeup, the results of that the quiz are pretty important for the rest of the course. So it's important that you get that done and clear. Between this lesson and the next as you move forward, because the information you get from this questionnaire will be relevant in terms of understanding this information, how it applies to you. Um, so it's very good for you to know your dosha. Now, with that said, we will go ahead and conclude this particular lesson here. There's a few points that I'd like to put up for you to take with you from this lesson and to try to incorporate into your routine and your regular daily life as you go on, and it will help some of this information soak in and make a little more sense. So you need to begin thinking of yourself as a multidimensional being, as we went over the model from Adi Shankara earlier in the lesson. And that's where it's good for you to just start noticing some of these things that we've discussed today in terms of what part of yourself you may be acting from at any particular moment, or in your mind kind of you allow your mind to go to this level or that level, and remember, you have your physical, subtle, or causal body and the different breakdowns of those to consider with that. So just be aware of yourself as being more than just this person that is kind of stuck in the things that may have known, and see yourself as this more expanded awareness. Um, Also, be aware of your current mind-body state and which dosha is most prominent. So you can revisit those characteristics that I pointed out, and look at which qualities you're showing at any particular moment or circumstance, and start thinking of them in terms of doshas and in terms of this elemental interplay. Okay, and then another thing which is very important, just as a practice in general, and it will help a lot as you go along in this course, because of the reflection that you may gain from it, is meditate for 20 to 30 minutes each morning and evening if you can afford that time. If you can afford the space and the time to meditate for 20 to 30 minutes morning and evening, it would be great. And you will notice immediate differences in your life as a result of it. But if you can only do, start off with 10 minutes, 15 minutes, even 5 minutes, if that's all you have, it still will be beneficial. And we'll get more into that as we go along, and that may also help you increase that time, because the meditation practice is very, very important. And with all that said, I would like to close this lesson by saying namaste. As you can see here, if you're not familiar with the term, this can translate to I bow to you, or as you may have come across it before, it's more commonly translated as the divine light in me honors the divine light in you. So through this medium, through this video, I reach out to you in whatever time and space that you may find yourself, and I say namaste.